In this video, I will be going over the Fiend class specialization in relation to the Warlock class. A Fiend is a creature of the lower planes, of which there are many different kinds of Fiends who you'll get to choose from and form a pact with. Keep in mind, however, that a Fiend is going to work towards goals of their own, and if you decide to pact with that Fiend, they might have significant strings attached to that particular pact. Any Warlock can choose a Fiend to form a pact with, even if your own alignment differs from that of the Fiend. However, a Fiend generally seeks out their victims, subjects, in which they will offer a pact. In the latter case, the character might be going through some form of internal conflict, or has a desire that draws the attention of that Fiend. And as a DM, I would pick up on that and request that the player create a basic idea of their pact and what their character's goals and desires are. I will then use that information to create the final variant of this particular pact, in which the player will then have to be in agreement of in order to be able to gain access to their spells. I will also have the player sometimes roleplay that out, in that their selection has been made in relation to their specialization, but their patron has not yet been chosen, and I will weave it into the story of that character to have a specific fiend or two visit them and provide them an offer that they most likely can't refuse. However, no matter how your patron has come to you, fiends are inherently evil, and they are going to be constantly testing you and generally trying to push you over lines you might not generally want to cross. In relation to the types of fiends that you can actually have a pact with, they include demon lords, archdevils, pit fiends, and even ultraloths, essentially covering the gamut of the available demon lords that exist. And that is the key. The fiend has to be of a lordly power in relation to the hell that they reside in. If they are not of that class, they are generally fodder, and as a result don't have the power to be able to offer pacts with a player. But those who can do it have enough power to give them the ability to grant you spells through the pact. Generally at the cost of your soul, is usually how it's going to work though. Much like the Archfey, however, you are given an expanded list of spells that other Warlocks will not be able to use, including access to the Fireball spell. And with this particular specialization, the additional spells are generally fire-oriented, which aligns with the various hells that your patron might reside in, even though there are some hells that are not all about fire. So with that, let's actually begin the process of going through the various features you're going to gain as a Fiend specialized Warlock. The first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to acquire two features. The first one is going to be Dark One's Blessing, and the second one is going to be the expanded spell list. So let's pull that up first. So with the expanded spell list, it's going to provide you an additional list of spells that you can choose from as you level your character up. So we could have, for example, instead of choosing Hellish Rebuke and Hex, we could have chosen Burning Hands and Command as one of our first selection of spells, because they are available. And that's in addition to the spells that you get through your standard Pact Magic options. You'll notice, though, that a lot of these spells are specific to fire, in the sense that they are all generally fire-related, with the exception of Stinking Cloud, Command, Deafness, and Hollow. I don't believe that one is specific to fire. No, okay. But it just gives you a different set of options you can choose as you level through your character. In relation to Dark One's Blessing, as you reduce a hostile creature to 0 hit points, you are able to gain temporary hit points equal to your Charisma modifier plus your Warlock level. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that if you knock a character unconscious, or you knock a creature unconscious who's hostile to you, or kill them outright, you can gain hit points that act as a buffer to you. So if you look on your main page here, you have your current maximum number of hit points. You also have a field that represents the amount of damage you have taken. So in case you're unclear as to what that is, if there was a 2 here, that would mean that you have 8 hit points remaining because you have suffered 2 points of damage out of the maximum 10 points of hit points that you have. Temporary hit points act as a buffer in the sense that anytime you take damage, as long as your temporary hit point count is higher than 0, the hit points will come off the buffer first before they start coming off your total hit points. So if you had 10 temporary hit points, you would be able to have 10 or take 10 hit points of damage before it would even start going through your own 10 hit points. That's how that essentially works. And I have no idea why that was such a tongue twister. I've tried to say that about 13 times so far, and that's the best that I could get. In any event, this is something that we can add to our actions page. So I'm just going to minimize these two here and drag this into place. Now you will see we don't have to really configure everything. Everything should already be set up. And it's set up to take your charisma stat plus your warlock level and give you a total of 5 temporary hit points. As you level up, because there is your warlock level coming into play here, as you level up, this will increase. In theory, if nothing changes with your charisma, at level 20, you could eventually end up with 24 maximum hit points that you could actually add as a temporary hit point buffer every time you reduce a creature to 0 hit points. You'll notice there's no limit. It's every time. But you have to be the one to give it the killing blow. So, in a combat situation, essentially you're going to be set up like this. So, essentially it'll work like this. While you're in the combat tracker, you will be set up to do combat, obviously. In this particular case, I have targeted this particular rate, mainly because it's got the most amount of damage that it has in place. I'm going to cast Hex on that particular ape, in the sense that the next time I make an attack on that particular ape, if I hit, it's going to suffer an additional 1d6 hit points of necrotic damage. Now, let's say that I attack. In this case, I miss, but let's say I do eventually hit. So here's a hit. I'm now going to do the damage, and we should see that 2d6 hit points of damage is done because I've done the quarterstaff damage, but I also had Hex enabled on that particular creature. I'm at this point now able to use Dark One's Blessing because I killed that particular creature. It has been reduced to 0 hit points. That means that I can now do that. And if you look here, you will see that there are 5 temporary hit points. Now let's say the next creature to go, and I will address this to the succubus for now, is this particular succubus. And let's say that it has you targeted. And let's see, I'm going to do that, and it hits. And it's rolling with disadvantage for some reason, because it's prone. That's fine. Now, it has done damage to you. But you'll notice your temporary hit points were removed before you took actual damage. So the total amount of damage that you suffered was 9 hit points. So the 5 hit points that you had here as the buffer disappeared first. And then you actually took the 4 hit points of damage. That's how that particular feature works, Dark One's Blessing. So the next feature that you will gain will be at level 6, and it is called Dark One's Own Luck. In this particular case, you are given the ability to essentially add an additional d10 to an ability check. And this could be a saving throw or an ability check, doesn't matter. Either one will work in this case. You get to see the results of that roll, and before the effects of that roll are defined, you can choose to add the additional 1d10 die roll to the total amount that you have rolled. So let's say, for example, you needed to succeed on a DC 14 check. You rolled a 13, which meant you failed. The DM is able to tell you what that result is, and then you get to choose whether to simply allow it to fail, or as long as you have not yet used this ability before your last rest, you can add a 1d10 die roll. So in this case, if I roll 1d10, I can add an additional 7 points to the 13 that I got, giving me a 20, which gives me a success. That's essentially how that works. Now, this is something that you will need to keep track of, which means it has to go into your actions page. Now, something I didn't do last time, I did not create the Warlock. In fact, this is actually the Fiend grouping, so I'm going to move that there. I'm going to drag this into place and also move it to the Fiend. Now, there's one thing you could do here, in theory, to help set things up. You could add a 1d10 die roll here, but there really isn't anything that is convenient because the actions that you can do is a cast, a damage, a heal, or an effect. Not something we need to worry about. So in relation to the d10, just simply roll it and add that to the actual summary. But we do need to track how frequently you use it. So once you use this feature, you can't use it again until you finish a short or a long rest. What that means is that you have to... That's not that one, it's this one. You have to set this up so that you can use it once before you actually go through and have a rest. So let's say I've used it. Well, now I have to go through a rest. And that is done either at a camp or you're taking a short rest after combat, something to that effect. And when you take a short rest, you will see that it returns. So this is how this works. And it gives you a bit of a buffer here as well in relation to your saving throw or your ability check. So it's still kind of useful. The next feature you're going to gain is going to be gained at level 10, and it is called Fiendish Resilience. And what it gives you the ability to do is choose a damage type at the time of a short rest or a long rest that you will become resistant to. You won't become immune to it, but you will become resistant to. So let's say you decide to choose fire. Anytime you took fire damage, you would take half of the amount of damage you normally would have taken. So in theory, if you were the victim of a fireball and you succeeded on your saving throw, your dexterity saving throw for that fireball, then what will happen is that you will suffer the initial half damage for the fireball. So let's say the damage was 18, you would take 9 points. Well, if you had chosen fire resistance as part of your damage type resistance, then you would only suffer 5 hit points of damage, not 9 hit points of damage. So it suffers down, and I believe it's rounded up from that point. And this is something you can choose every time you complete a rest. However, there's 2 exceptions to this rule. Anytime you are hit with magical weapons, or anytime you are hit with silver weapons, it will ignore that resistance. It does, however, mean that you still get to resist spells. So in this particular case, the only time a spell will get through that resistance is if its damage is classified as magic. That's the type of damage it's doing, not the damage type of fire or the damage type of acid, so on and so forth. If its damage type does not add that magic property to it, you will be resistant to it. That's essentially the limitation. Now, you can go through and set this up in your Actions tab. And again, this is a Fiend. The Fiend, sorry, grouping. So it's going to get grouped under here. And you'll notice that it has this blank damage resistance field. I'm not sure why it's damage, actually, now that I think about that. It shouldn't be. It should be an effect. So, this needs to be corrected. Essentially, what you will need to do is remove this. So remove that action from that and add in a new effect. Then what you will do is something like this. Fiendish Resilience, semicolon, resist, colon, and let's say I decided to choose acid on this particular guy. provided I can spell it today, and it will be on yourself. There really isn't a duration of this, because you could theoretically go through multiple rests and decide not to actually choose the resistance type, or change it, I mean. So there really isn't anything that you have to do from this or from this. So it doesn't expire in either of these two cases. But what you could do is go through and set up the various types of damage, which would include acid, cold, fire, force, lightning, necrotic, poison, psychic, radiant, thunder, adamantine, bludgeoning, cold forged iron, piercing, or slashing. Those are the damage types that you can actually go through and resist. And I will make sure that I include in the description of this particular video the link as to where you can get that list. That way you don't have to always figure it out. But for the sake of simplicity, you could actually go through and preload all of that in there. That way, if you do decide to actually go through and change it, all you have to do is go into the combat tracker. So let's say that I had the acid resistance enabled here. Go into the effects field here and simply remove the resistance and then choose the different type of resistance you had set up. So that's literally all you'd have to do. And it would go through and update the different resistance that you had selected. Now, it's useful to always have the Fiendish Resilience title in there, simply because it tells the Dungeon Master what skill or feature is providing that ability. So I will go through and quickly add in the various different damage types and show you what that will look like. So I've gone through and preloaded everything that you can actually create a resistance to. So from cold all the way through to slashing. And you'll notice the only two that are not here are magic and silver, because those are the two that do not have the ability to be affected by this particular resistance. And this way, you can pretty much make the decision, okay, today I'm going to not be resistant to acid. Today looks like we're going into a colder area, so maybe I'll choose cold. That kind of thing. So that's what it comes down to. So everything from acid all the way through to slashing. So the last feature you will gain through this class specialization, you will gain at level 14. And it is called Hurl through Hell. And it is an interesting one. Essentially what it comes down to is when you hit a creature with an attack, and that means that it could be a melee attack, it could be a ranged attack. As long as you have hit that attack, you can actually transport this particular character, or your creature, sorry, through the lower planes, if you will, anywhere in the lower planes, and it will be a random decision by the DM as to which one it is. And that creature is essentially out of the fight until the end of your next turn. It will then reappear at the previous location that it was, and in the process, it will suffer 10d10 of psychic damage as it reels from the experience it just went through. However, you can only use this once between each long rest. So it's not something you get to use too often. Essentially, it's a once per day thing. This definitely means it's something you will be adding to your actions tab. And you do that simply by dragging and dropping it into place. And as you can see, it already has the 10d10 psychic damage here. So in this particular case, your character has a dagger, well, a couple of daggers. One, technically, there are two of them if you throw that. You have a mace and a quarterstaff. If you hit with any one of these weapons here, you can choose to activate this ability. It's not done as a bonus action. It is not done as a reaction. It's a condition on, instead of you doing the damage with the weapon, you would do the damage with this hurl through spell. So let's say you hit them with the quarterstaff. You then teleport them through this wormhole through the lower planes, and when they pop back into view at the end of your next turn, they'll immediately suffer the 10d10 psychic damage. That's absolutely insane from a quarterstaff. But at the same time, this ability is only something that should be used once per day. So you'll want to increase this to a 1 and leave the rest entry here as daily. That way, if you do decide to use it, its functionality will go away until you execute a long rest. So if I execute a short rest through the Dungeon Master side here, so I'm going to do a short rest, you'll see it doesn't return. But if I execute a long rest, you will see that the ability has now returned. And that is how that ability is supposed to function. Now, as a bit of a catch here, I would argue that if you are casting a spell, that spell would not trigger this particular effect because you're so focused on casting that spell, you're expecting the spell's results to happen. Whether it's a fireball effect, whether it's a magic missiles effect if you happen to have that ability, etc., etc. The only time I feel this will actually apply is if you use your quarterstaff, your mace, or the 2 daggers that you have, or any other form of melee weapon or ranged weapon that you have on your person. That is the limitation that I, as a Dungeon Master, would put in this particular case. However, some DMs will probably still allow you to have the effects of the fireball occur, but at the same time you can add this. That's up to them. But in my opinion, you're going to end up doing 10d10 psychic damage anyway. That's more than enough power. You don't need the fireball on top of that. If you ever hit a dragon with that, holy crap. That's going to be one upset dragon when it comes back. And with that, we have now finished all of the features that you are going to gain by passing through the Fiend class specialization. There are no additional adjustments that come through here. All the other abilities and features that you're going to gain are going to come directly from the Warlock class. So I would recommend you go watch the Warlock video if you decide to see what comes after level 14 in this particular case, or if you're looking for a specific feature to the Warlock class itself. So I hope you enjoyed this particular video, and I hope to see you in the next one. I wish to thank you for taking the time to watch this particular video. I hope you found it informative and useful to familiarizing yourself with Fantasy Grounds in general, and that you had fun in the process. If you found the video useful and you liked the content of the particular video, go ahead and click that like button to let me know. And if you have any questions specific to the topic covered by this particular video, or just have some comments in general, please feel free to post something in the comments section, and I will do my best to respond to any questions that are asked. Additionally, I do release content quite regularly, and it's generally specific to Fantasy Grounds or 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons at this time. So if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out, go ahead and subscribe and click the notification bell to ensure that notification is sent to you when I release a new video.